Our topic this morning, superstition. I used to be superstitious, by the way. Then I heard it's bad luck, so I stopped. It's one of those things that's quite difficult to actually define. What is superstition? What defines something as superstition? One definition I saw was, superstition is everybody else's religion. That's what the superstition is. What makes something superstitious, and what's the Jewish position on superstition? It seems in a general sense, any religious practice could almost be defined as superstitious. Because what does it mean to be superstitious? It means to believe that a certain thing will have some effect that is irrational. That's, I guess, the most basic definition of a superstition. That by doing something, there'll be a result of your action that cannot be scientifically proven. There's no direct correlation that can be observed between your action and the reaction on the result. But you believe that by doing this, something's going to happen. So surely any religious practice, any spiritual practice would come under that definition of superstitious. That if you think that by lighting Shabbos candles, you're going to bring holiness into the world and make the world a better place, well, why should lighting candles make the world any better? That sounds quite superstitious. Or if you think that by getting married on Tuesday, your wedding will be particularly blessed, sounds superstitious to me. Why should Tuesday make your marriage any better than any other day? And so on and so forth. Any other religious custom or practice could be called superstitious. And so the question is, what really defines superstition? And what's the Jewish position on these things? When is something called superstition and therefore rejected? And when is something considered a valid spiritual practice? Or is all spirituality superstitious? How does it actually work? Now, there is a common attitude that many people in the Jewish community have, and that is that superstition is forbidden. That Judaism is against superstition. You're not allowed to be superstitious. That's quite a well-known concept. At the same time, there are also very well-known superstitions, it seems, that are particularly Jewish. What are some particularly Jewish superstitions that you know of?
Putting on shoes.
Putting on shoes.
Well, you put the right one before.
Put the right shoe on first, then the left shoe after that. Sounds pretty superstitious. Any other Jewish superstitions? Not walking around in your socks, but wearing the shoes. Yeah. And that one.
If a woman's pregnant, my grandmother can't go to the zoo. My grandmother's pregnant with the same mouse. She goes like that. The baby will immediately have the same colour as the mouse.
Sorry, if the woman's pregnant and you...
The woman's pregnant.
Yeah.
And she's frightened. And wherever she puts her hand, that's where she's going, the colour of the mouse will come out.
So wherever she puts her hand when she gets a fright...
Yes, it'll come out brown when the baby's born.
The baby will come out that colour. The colour of the...
There'll be a mole
a mark on that part of the... Okay. That part of the skin. There'll be a mark. If she hits herself on the leg, then there'll be a mark on the leg. Okay?
My daughter said she don't go like this, you'll have a red mark on.
If you go like this when you're pregnant, then there'll be a mark on the face.
And don't look at monkeys.
Not supposed to put keys on the table. Okay. Don't open an umbrella in the house. What will happen if you do?
Bad luck. You had to pull your ear up if you sneeze when you were talking about death or something.
If you sneeze when you're talking about death, you pull your ear up.
That's right. Got to sit on a suitcase before you go on a holiday.
Nothing's coming in the men, have you noticed?
Never bring an elephant ornament into the home.
Anything to do with an elephant.
Anything to do with an elephant.
Because every time somebody gave him a present as an ornament, that somebody died in the family. I don't think it's a Jewish thing, I think it's just our family.
Just in a particular family superstition that every time you get an elephant, something bad's going to happen in the family.
And don't say how many children or grandchildren you have.
When somebody asks you how many children or grandchildren, you don't say the number.
My friend never tells. She said we don't count them.
Don't count them. Mm-hmm.
And what about various segulas?
Yeah, segulas.
For, keeping them just for good luck.
Right, yeah, like things that bring blessing or
Yes,
good
yes.
luck. Yep. That's also seemed to be like a superstitious thing. Kanai Nahara, the phrase Kanai Nahara, which means without an evil eye. So if somebody says your child is very smart, Kanai Nahara, without an evil eye, or whenever you give a compliment or say something good, you mention Kanai Nahara. Yeah, that's another very Jewish one.
My grandmother had another one, but she should never have been photographed when a couple become engaged. They should never have their photographs taken until they're married, because they'll never be married.
To not photograph someone until they get married, because then they won't get married. Okay.
Must be all new to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Or sitting on the corner of the table. What about that one? Not allowed to sit on the corner, because then you'll never get married. Yeah. Have you heard of this one? There are a lot of superstitions surround pregnancy, childbirth, and babies. A lot of particular superstitions there.
The mirror for the baby.
To not let the baby look in the mirror until they grow teeth.
Yeah.
Or until they can talk, some say. Because if a baby sees their own reflection before they grow teeth, then they're never going to be able to speak, or to speak properly, or their teeth won't grow straight, or something like that. So they shouldn't look in a mirror. Yeah, that's a common one.
I heard some people, if the woman's pregnant, they'll start talking to the baby with maybe math problems, and they'll eventually one day solve it or something.
Yeah, well, there's a thing that's become in fashion today to try and teach the fetus in the womb things. And there are a lot of people who play classical music around the fetus. They say that will develop their intelligence. I haven't heard that one said to actually ask them maths problems that they'll be able to solve later, but that fits in as well. There are ancient customs around that as well, which we'll talk about around the fetus, and the fetus having awareness of what's going on around. A pregnant woman has to go through the door first. You shouldn't walk in front of a pregnant woman. In case she's holding the Mashiach, so she should go first through the door. Interesting, yeah. Around pregnancy, a few examples are a woman not revealing her pregnancy, not telling anyone she's pregnant till a certain point in the pregnancy, which is common practice in the world today, but certainly in the Jewish world, there's a tradition not to reveal that you're pregnant until into the 4th month of pregnancy. Not buying anything for the baby. There's an idea of starting to buy the clothes or decorating the room until the baby's born. Some would say also not finding out the gender, the sex of the baby.
Is that a superstition?
Well, it wouldn't be a very old one. But
they would never find out at that day.
No, although they might have had ways of finding out then as well, but they were probably superstitious ways.
I'm not sure if it's a superstition, but I heard that the ultra-Orthodox, it's sinful to carefully plan to have children. Like you can't plan to have finance or money, you just have children.
So to not have children, you don't?
No, you can't carefully plan because it's a sin, because I think you're supposed to have children.
Right. Well, there's a mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying. Yeah.
There's something about when you say something about somebody, or you speak 3 times or something.
Yeah, that's also a bit of a Kanai Nahara one as well. That if you say something nice about someone, you go puh puh puh, and you spit, which is also like when you just gave a compliment, but you don't want to make it an evil eye, so puh 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 somehow dispels the evil eye. So so there are many of these things are particularly Jewish. Some of them other nations and other people do, but some of these things are particularly Jewish, and are specifically kept amongst the Jewish people. There's another interesting one around pregnancy, is that at a bris, at a boy's circumcision, so there's a custom to give a couple the honor of bringing the baby into the room. So the mother of the baby starts off with the baby, hands it to a woman who gives it to her husband at the doorway of the room, and then that husband brings the baby into the room. And that they are called the kvater and kvaterin, which itself is, by the way, a mysterious word, what kvater and kvaterin means and where it comes from. It's Yiddish, but where it comes from and what it means is unknown. There are various different theories. One theory is that it comes from the German Gottvater, Godfather. And that's why a lot of people call the Kvater the Godfather of the child, even though in Judaism there's not really a concept of Godfather and Godmother necessarily. But some say that no, this is the Kvater and the Kvaterin are the Godfather and Godmother. Possible. But either way, it's a particular honor to give to a couple.
And usually a couple that don't have children, right?
So yes, there is such a thing, to give it to a couple who do not yet have children, or they have children but want more, as a blessing that they should be blessed with a child. But there is a tradition not to give it if they're pregnant. If the woman is pregnant, she shouldn't be the kvater. Which also has mystical or spiritual reasons, that there could be some ayin hara, an evil eye on her, if she is in this sort of central role at the bris, and she has a baby that might give bad energy to her and endanger the fetus. That's one of the reasons why she's not given the role of kvater.
I've only got two. My first one is on Pesach, we open the door to an Eliyahu to come in, and the second one is a superstition. Like, this is dangerous me saying this, but speaking Yiddish, because I know that people who speak Yiddish don't speak Hebrew.
Yeah, no, I don't know if that would be superstitious necessarily, but yeah. So all these things, there are some people who would dismiss all of these things that we've discussed completely, because all of them are irrational. None of them have any sense to them. Like, what can possibly go wrong if you buy a little outfit for a baby before they're born? Well, why should that make any difference? Or if a pregnant woman is the kvaterin to bring the baby into the room at a bris, well, what's the danger there? Or if somebody asks you how many grandchildren you have and you say the number, what's the issue? What's the problem? Is there an immoral issue there? Is there a prohibition in the Torah that says you're not allowed to do that? And so some people will say that to do anything or say anything that will either bring good luck or bad luck, bring a blessing or bring a curse, if it's not prohibited by the Torah, so then there's nothing wrong with it. If it's not commanded by the Torah, then there's nothing good about it. So to do these things because you're worried about something will go wrong, well, if the Torah doesn't prohibit it, why should it be anything bad? And so too, doing things that will bring protection or blessing. You know, we've only discussed so far things that are dangerous, and if you do it, there might be danger. What about things that are protective, that are a blessing? Are there any Jewish superstitions around that? The things that could help you? Mezuzah, some would say Mezuzah being a protection. I mean, the Mezuzah is commanded by the Torah, but the Torah doesn't say the Mezuzah is going to protect you. It just says write it as a sign on your doorpost. The idea that the Mezuzah should protect you, or that if things are going wrong and bad, then you should check your mezuzah to make sure it's kosher. Some would say, well, that sounds superstitious. What, the mezuzah is some magical protection? What else? What are other Jewish protections and blessings?
Kippah?
Amulets?
Wearing a kippah?
Yeah?
That's just a command.
Well, that's a custom. That's a custom. I've never heard that it brings blessing, specifically.
Once somebody told me that when a woman wears a shaitel, I don't know if this is Kabbalah, but it's can protect your children.
Yes.
Even though you're wearing a shaitel, that your children will be protected.
Yeah, there is an idea that there'll be a blessing, there'll be parnassa, you may make a living, and your children will be blessed by covering your hair with a shaitel. That's an example. There's also around babies, particularly there's the little shir hamalos. It's a little prayer that's printed out, a protective amulet. If you ever read what it says on it, it has a psalm from King David about that God is protecting, but it also has a whole bunch of names of angels, very complicated names of angels to protect the baby, and it also banishes a negative force called Lilith from the baby. It's actually written on those amulets. So that seems like a pure mystical amulet to protect the baby. That's certainly one. Then there's of course the red strings, the Kabbalah red strings. That is indeed an old custom that's become a fad and a bit of a business as well. But the red strings is a Jewish tradition of protection. It's a little red bracelet made out of wool or cotton, and it's supposed to protect you from the evil eye. Also the hamsa, which is the hand with the 4 fingers on it and 2 thumbs. Yeah, well, it's a Sephardi custom. It's from Eastern area. I mean, the Muslims also use it. They also see it as a protection. It's supposed to ward off the evil eye. It's like a stop sign for the evil eye to prevent it coming in. The hamsa. It's a 5-fingered hand with two thumbs.
Superstition, or is that just?
That's what's the difference? What's the difference between superstition and Jewish custom?
I don't know. That's always been my question.
Good. So you're in the right place. I hope so. So, but it seems like there's certainly no logic that a red string should repel the evil eye, or that a hand with 2 thumbs on it should somehow help a baby. That doesn't seem necessarily something so helpful. There's another one that when a woman is in her 9th month of pregnancy, there's a tradition that her husband should go to shul and open the ark to take the Torah out. And what that's supposed to do is, by opening the ark, it's symbolic of opening the womb, that the womb should open with blessing and in a good way. And so by him opening the ark and taking the Torah out, it should invoke a blessing that the pregnancy should go smoothly and the birth should be successful with health for the mother and the baby. And also in the sources it says that he should make sure also to close the ark afterwards as well when the Torah comes back. Because just like it's important for the womb to open up in a healthy way, it's also important for it to close again healthily. So he should do that as well. Again, I don't think any doctor would confirm that opening the ark is somehow helpful for a smooth birth. And in fact, as one person pointed out, that there's been 1 billion people born in China. At least 1 billion people are born in China, and it seems that not one of their fathers ever opened the ark, and they were successfully born. So to say that somehow this is an important thing to do, I mean, it would be very easy to dismiss it as superstition.
One of the biggest one, Ushpizin. You say Ushpizin? It's about the astrology.
Yeah. That's right. Doing a mitzvah should somehow bring blessing of children. So all these things, and we'll talk about more of them as we go along, all of these things, they certainly seem to be irrational. And the basis of what at least the secular or the common definition of superstition is that an irrational act, something that thinking one thing will lead to another thing when there's no logical connection between the two. Now, we have to actually be careful, because to dismiss something as superstition simply because it's irrational, that's not our attitude. That's certainly not the Jewish attitude. There are many things that are irrational in Judaism, and that we don't shy away from irrationality. Irrational just means we can't explain it, or we don't have a logic behind it, or human logic doesn't relate to it and understand it. That doesn't make it ridiculous. And certainly the Torah does not reject irrationality. There are certain things that are irrational. However, there are certain verses in the Torah that seem to tell us to stay away from superstition. But if we look at them carefully, we'll see why. The main one is in the book of Leviticus, where it says that you should be careful to not learn to do the abominations of the nations that you will meet in the land of Israel. So God telling the Israelites as they're traveling towards the land of Israel, He warns them and tells them that the nations that inhabit the land of Israel at the moment, they have many customs that are abominations, meaning that they're things that God does not like, does not want you to do. You should be careful when you reach the land to not start to imitate them. The Israelites in the desert were in like a bubble. They were isolated. When they're coming to the land, they're going to be surrounded by other nations. They should be careful not to follow their ways. And specifically, the Torah lists that you should not use divination or soothsayers or enchanters, witches, charmers, a medium, wizards, necromancers, all these various different superstitious powers. You shouldn't go along these things. Included in that being told that a certain day is good for doing this, or certain things are a sign for that. All of these things you should avoid doing. And why? Because it says that because the nations of the land are involved in these things, that's why they're being expelled from the land, and you're coming into it, because they are living in a way that's not acceptable. And so it concludes and says you should be simple and go simply with the Lord your God. You should go on a simple path with the Lord your God. Don't try all these mystical tricks. That's what it seems to be saying. Now what's clear from these verses is that the prohibition involved here is not because there's something spiritual, it's because there's something idolatrous about these practices. That these are the practice of idolaters. And so by getting involved with mediums and seances, or with somebody who can tell you your fortune, or what day is good to do that and what day is good to do this, those people are using idolatrous sources for their advice, and that is something that we have to stay away from. And so it seems quite clear from here that the question is not so much whether something is rational or irrational. The question is whether it is from an idolatrous source or is from a kosher source. And so therefore superstition in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with a superstition as long as it's a kosher superstition. I mean, maybe we shouldn't use the word superstition because it has a negative connotation. But yeah, if there's a custom or a tradition, even if that's a spiritual one that seems to not have rational explanation, if it's coming from a kosher source, that's not idolatrous. If it's coming from an idolatrous source, it's a problem because it's connected to idolatry. That's what the real problem is. And so, therefore, we would have a very different attitude to superstition with that in mind, that the prohibition is whether it's connected to idolatry. And so we have to analyze what is the reason for this prohibition, and what does it actually apply to. It doesn't apply to just any old superstition. It only applies to those who come from idolatrous sources. Now there's a fascinating disagreement amongst the commentaries about these prohibitions that I just mentioned. The question is, with these necromancers, enchanters, witches, wizards, and soothsayers, and others who can tell you your fortune, is the problem with them that they're idolatrous, or is it that they're false? Meaning, do they actually have power? If you go to somebody who tells you what your lucky day is, or the way you should go, or what sign you should look for to know if you're going on the right path or not, is what they're saying just meaningless? Is it empty, or does it have power to it, just we're not allowed to play with it? This is actually a difference of opinion. Maimonides, the great Rambam, who was in the 12th century, the great Spanish Jewish author, halachic expert, doctor, philosopher. So he wrote that all of these practices are rubbish. It's all nonsense. That the non-Jewish spiritual seers and visionaries and prophets, they're all full of it. They were all just smoke and mirrors. They were able to play these tricks and make people believe in them, but there's no truth to it. And so their visions, their ideas, their philosophies are all just junk and emptiness. And so the reason why we should stay away from it is because it's simply foolishness. It's empty. It has nothing to it. It has no meaning. And that's Maimonides' opinion, and he's very emphatic about it, that there's no truth to what they have to say. Ramban Nachmanides, who was a contemporary of Rambam, but he was more openly a mystic than Maimonides was. He had a very different view of it, and he said that no, there is certain power to these soothsayers. They actually do have some reality to them. Their advice and their blessings and their ideas can actually have effect. There are lucky days and bad days, and there is a possibility to know somebody's destiny through looking at the stars and all these type of things. Nachmanides says that there is truth to it. It's just something we're not supposed to mess with. We're not supposed to be involved in. It's not because it doesn't make any sense or doesn't have any validity to it. It does. It's just prohibited because it's connecting to spiritual powers that we are not supposed to connect to. So Nachmanides says that there are people who could tell you your destiny, there are people who could read into the future, and there are certain practices that you could do that may actually make something happen. It could be real. Just you're not allowed to get involved in it not because it's nonsense because it's getting involved with the wrong side of things. I remember once when I was living in New York, I caught a taxi, and the taxi driver started chatting to him, and asked him where he's from. He was from Haiti. And I'd never met anyone from Haiti. There's a lot of people in New York from Haiti, but I'd never met anyone from Haiti. And so the only thing I knew about Haiti is, probably what most people know about Haiti, is voodoo. I grew up hearing that in Haiti they practice this practice of voodoo, where they put pins into into dolls, and they can do all types of black magic type of thing. So I was very interested. This guy from Haiti. So I asked him, "Is it true that in Haiti there's a lot of this black magic stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." And I said to him, "What, you mean you saw things happen?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely. I've seen all types of weird things." When I pinned him down to ask him what exactly, he wasn't really able to express anything clear that he had seen in the realm of black magic. But he said to me, "But I'll tell you something you can do. Try this. When you go home today, go home to your apartment, take a broom, and put a cup, like a coffee mug that you usually use to drink coffee, put a mug on top of the broom, and sweep around your apartment holding this mug on top of your broom." Now, I'd never swept my apartment in my life, but I thought maybe it's worth trying. So, with a mug on top. So sweep around your apartment, and then do that all around the apartment. Then take that mug that you put on top of the broom and put it on your bedside table next to your head when you sleep. And he said, in your dreams you will see the weirdest things. You'll see the weirdest things. Okay, so he said, "Are you going to do it?" I said, "I'll be honest, I'm not going to do it." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm Jewish and we don't practice these things. This is getting involved in a side of spirituality that we don't get involved in, so I'm not going to do it." So he said, "Why? What's the problem?" He said, "I'm Catholic, but we still do this." And he said how in Haiti, like a lot of them are Catholic, but they've mixed sort of black magic with their Catholicism, and for them it's not an issue. Okay, for them it's maybe not. But I said for us it is an issue. Not that what he said is meaningless. It could be true. It might be true, and maybe if somebody tries it, it'll work. We don't try it because you are putting yourself in connection with powers that are not for us to mess with. So even if it's a valid thing, it might be a real thing, but it's not a kosher thing, because it's the powers of the black side, the negative side, or whatever it is that you're connecting to. The same would apply to connecting with angelic forces. There are a lot of people today who want to connect you to angels, your guardian angel, or whatever it is. So again, according to Maimonides, according to Rambam, it's just foolishness. Sweeping the apartment with a mug on top of your broom, or speaking to an angel, or having a seance and talking to the dead, all these things are just foolishness. That's what Rambam says. Ramban, Nachmanides would say, no, it's not foolishness, it's real stuff. It's dangerous. You're not supposed to mess in that type of thing. Don't get involved in it. Don't start connecting to angels. We're supposed to connect to God only. No other force. So it's a difference of opinion. Now, what's interesting is that the people have questioned the Rambam's opinion, Maimonides, and said that even though his side seems very rational and very logical, but it doesn't seem to fit into Jewish tradition. Because if you look at Jewish tradition, there is so much written about the forces of magic and the dark side of spirituality and it having real power. And to completely reject it and say that it has no meaning and it's completely false, it seems a very difficult thing to say. Starting from Bilam in the Torah. Bilam was a sorcerer who was able to divine God's messages. And throughout the Talmud, there's so much in the Talmud about black magic. The Talmud was written in Babylon, and Babylon was a real center of superstitious type of religion. There was a lot of astrology and other types of spiritualities that were centered in Babylon. And so the rabbis of the Talmud were exposed to a lot of stuff, dream interpreters and people who could speak to the dead and all that type of stuff. It was going on a lot in Babylon in the times of the Talmud. And so the Talmud records many cases of the non-Jewish spiritual sages and all the types of things that they were able to do. For Maimonides to come along and to say that that was all false and not true and didn't happen and had no power and it's all just a facade, it seems like a very big jump from everything that was written before Maimonides. Whereas Nachmanides, who says that it's real, it's just not for us, that seems to fit much better. So how do we reconcile Maimonides with that? And another question we can ask is, a lot of these things seem to have happened like before the industrial era. You know, a lot of these sort of mystical things seem to have happened once upon a time, but not so much today. So, like these people who had the ability to speak to the dead and to channel angels and to predict the future and to read dreams and all these type of things, it seems that once upon a time they were all over the place, and now they're not. They don't seem to be around anymore. So what has changed, and why is it that they were back then and not now? Well, some would say, well, because back then it wasn't easy to test these things. It was easy to make a claim. People were more superstitious. They were less sophisticated. There was no scientific method to examine these things, and so people made claims and they were believed. Whereas today they're not believed. But it could be a bit different. One of the Hasidic sages said that Maimonides, when Maimonides said that all these things are foolish, meaningless, and they don't have any validity, so he wasn't saying that they never had validity. He was proclaiming that they do not have validity anymore. Because there's a principle that says that a tzaddik, a righteous person, a Torah sage in this world, can make a halachic pronouncement, and that pronouncement will actually influence reality. By Maimonides making a statement in halacha, making a halachic statement that Jewish law says that all of these magical powers have no existence, have no reality, they're actually nonsense. By him saying that, he was making it that way. He wasn't describing reality, he was prescribing reality. He was deciding what reality is going to be. And so what Maimonides was trying to do was he was trying to weaken the powers of black magic in his time, because there was quite a hold and attraction that many Jews had towards it. He was trying to nullify their power, and so by stating they are nonsense in a halachic work, so it made it nonsense, it made it not real, it took away their power. He was combating the powers of black magic. And so therefore from the time of Maimonides onwards, they became much weaker and not prevalent anymore. So Maimonides was not negating what it says in the Talmud. Back in those times they were strong. He was putting a stop to it. This is similar to something that it actually that says in the Talmud. In the Talmud it says that the rabbis saw the power of idolatry was extremely strong. And this is something that, again, we don't really relate to nearly in any way. In the ancient world, idolatry was a real attraction. We find the great kings of Israel, King Solomon and King David, they had struggles with idolatry. To us, it's like, why on earth, why would anyone have any connection with idolatry? It seems like the most foolish thing to bow down to a stone, to a figurine. Why do people have any connection to it? What we don't understand is that in ancient times, idolatry had a real pull to it because there was a spiritual power to it. It wasn't simply just bowing down to a statue. The statue represented a spiritual power, and it somehow channeled that power, and there were ways of connecting to that spirituality through idolatrous practices. So by hanging around this idol, you actually could connect to some spiritual power, and you could utilize it. It could help you. It could do something for you. The attraction to it was that it was actually a much easier and more direct path to spirituality than Judaism was. Judaism believed in this invisible God that's everywhere, that's a bit hard to relate to, and also expected you to live a moral and upright life in order to receive God's blessings. Whereas idolatry had a God that you can picture, that was right there in front of you, and didn't expect anything of you, morally speaking. You didn't have to be a nice person at all. All you had to do was bring the right offerings to this God, and you would get divine blessing from that idol. So it was an easy path to spirituality. It was very attractive. And so it had a real power to it. The rabbis of the Talmud said that the power of idolatry is so intense, we're going to nullify its draw, its attraction. And so they somehow, together, the rabbis got together and nullified the inclination towards idolatry. They took away the desire to worship idols. Now, this had a side effect, and that is that it also takes away some spiritual yearning as well. If there's no yearning towards idolatry, there's also going to be less yearning towards spirituality generally, because everything is always balanced. If there's a yearning towards evil, there's a balanced yearning towards goodness as well. So if the idolatrous urge is taken away, the positive urge towards spirituality is also going to be taken away somewhat. And so when the rabbis made this decree, there was also a lessening in spiritual insight, generally in the world. But they saw it as worthwhile because idolatry was too attractive. It could have dragged away the entire Jewish people. Interestingly, they said, well, they were successful with this, so they said, let's keep going. We're on a roll. If we're able to nullify the evil inclination towards idolatry, let's go to the next one. Let's nullify the inclination towards sexual immorality. That drive is one that we do relate to, and let's get rid of that one as well. So they tried that, but they said that after that the chickens stopped laying eggs, and they saw you can't really survive without that one. So the drive towards sexual immorality is also balanced with the drive towards positive sexuality. That we can't take one away without losing the other one, so we better leave it as it is. Whereas the spiritual drive towards negative spirituality, towards idolatry, to take that away will cause a slight spiritual drop as well, but we can at least survive that one, and so they did. So idolatry was taken away, the power of idolatry was taken away. It seems Maimonides took that a step further, and he nullified all these powers, the soothsaying powers and all the mystical powers of black magic. He tried to nullify that as well, and that's why he claimed it to be nonsense. And so after his time, it has had much less of a hold. I haven't heard that one. What, the Yetzirah for idolatry?
Idolatry, they took that Yetzirah and said...
Instead of having a desire for idolatry, it's a desire for money? I haven't heard it. Interesting? No? Yeah?
I've even said it.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that, but I haven't heard that the evil inclination was transformed. That to me is a separate... Maybe, I don't know. What?
What the gentleman saying about Kapporis just before Yom Kippur, that's got nothing to do with
I don't think so.
spending the money.
No, I don't think so.
When you don't have a chicken.
Right. So I think that's just out of hatred. I don't think there's a basis. Sorry? Well, that's another example. So going back to these examples of superstition, if whether we take Maimonides' position or Nachmanides, both of them really are saying the same thing, and that is that the prohibition is the same. That the prohibition of any superstitious or spiritual practice is based on the fact that it's an idolatrous practice. Whether we say like Nachmanides that it was real and had power, or like Maimonides that it's nonsense, either way, the problem is, the issue is not that it's irrational, that it's idolatrous. That's clear. So therefore, any practice that we have, the question will be, where does it come from? What is the source of this practice? And not all practices will be in the Torah. Not everything will be written in the Torah or in the Talmud. There are certain traditions that are written nowhere, but they're Jewish traditions. If it's coming from a good source, so then it can be accepted as a Jewish practice. If it's coming from a foreign source, so then it could be idolatrous, and therefore we should stay away from it. I remember once having this discussion with somebody who said that how can you take any practice that is not a mitzvah, that's not commanded by the Torah, and say that it can have a positive effect? So how can you open the ark, or put on a red string, or put this protective prayer next to a baby, and think that that's going to have some positive effect when the Torah doesn't say to do it? How can it have any positive effect if there's no Torah commandment to say to do it, just because it's a tradition? So I explained to him that there are certain actions that have reactions that are not commanded by the Torah. When you plant a tree and the tree grows, that's not a mitzvah you just did. You planted the tree and the tree grew, and you can benefit from that. You can now get fruit from that. That's not a mitzvah you just did. It's just an action of planting a seed will bring out a reaction, which is the growth of a tree. That's true in the physical world. There's also certain spiritual reactions as well. There are certain things that we do. They may be physical actions, but they have spiritual content to them, and there's a spiritual reaction to it. And whether we understand it or not, that's irrelevant. There is a logic to the spiritual world as well. So just like we understand that planting a seed will cause a tree to grow and fruit to come out of that tree, so too there are certain actions that are spiritual plantings that have a reaction. It may not be a mitzvah. You may not have done a mitzvah, but it's a spiritual tradition. So the question will always be the source, where does it come from? Now, here, in trying to trace sources for these traditions, often it's very difficult, because many of them are not written anywhere. Generally in Jewish tradition, to find a source for something means to look into our written sources. The primary source is the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, then there's the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, there's the Midrash, there's the oral tradition that's been committed to writing, then there are the Kabbalistic writings of the Zohar, and then later Kabbalists. There are sources for things, and so anything we do, we look for a source, and that's something that is very very strong about the Jewish tradition, is that we look for sources. Where does it say such a thing? When it comes to these practices that seem superstitious, a lot of the time it's very hard to find their source. There was one rabbi, his name was Ramosha Stone, he lived not long ago, in the last century, and he was asked about a lot of these practices, the red string thing, the babies looking into the mirror. Another one he was asked about was, there's a thing that you shouldn't walk over a baby, step over a baby. And if you do, you have to step back over the baby, right? Otherwise some bad things can happen. He was asked about that one as well. So, about these three practices particularly, the red string, the baby looking in the mirror and walking over a baby, he wrote about all these three things that he saw this he was from Hungary, the city of Debrecen in Hungary. He said he saw that was done in the home, in the community. These were done things. There is no written source for any of these things. There is nowhere in Judaism that is a written source for these things being dangerous or being a blessing, whatever it is. However, he's quoted one of the halachic authorities, the Rabbi, who was a Spanish authority from the Middle Ages, who writes that apart from the sources that we have, the written traditional sources, there's another source in Judaism, and that is our grandmothers. The Rabbi writes that if the grandmothers did something, and it was common amongst grandmothers, not just your grandmother, but many grandmothers did this in the Jewish community, so then we can assume that they have a holy source, those practices. They should not be dismissed lightly, because the fact that they did it is because they received it from the past as well, and it has a holy source that we may not be privy to. But the grandmothers, the righteous grandmothers of Israel, should be trusted as an authority itself. That's what the Rabbi writes, and so therefore you should listen to what they say. Now, it's ironic that the word Bubba Maisa, which means something that's dismissed as like a superstition or something foolish or an old wives' tale. So Bubba Maisa means a grandmother's thing, like the things that the grandmothers do. So it's funny that it's just ironic that term that is used dismissively is the exact term that the Rabbi says should be taken seriously. The things that the grandmothers do should be taken seriously. Because that itself is a holy source. Now, the Rabbi is a holy source, and so the Rabbi, he's a halachic authority, and if he writes that what the grandmothers do should be accepted because it's holy, so then that itself is a halachic source for many things. And again, it doesn't mean what every grandmother does, it means what the grandmothers collectively do, something that was accepted as a custom. It shouldn't be dismissed quickly. Someone have a question? Yeah.
So does that mean that the higher the spirituality, the higher idolatry? Like you said, that if they got rid of statues and things, that the hens would start laying eggs. So would that mean like if Judaism became very righteous, so would everything else become much worse? Well,
there's an idea that the powers of evil and the powers of goodness are always on par with each other. So the stronger the powers of evil, the stronger the powers of goodness are. And if the powers of evil are weakened, so then the powers of goodness will also go down. They have to be on par. The world has to be balanced at all times. So so one of the reasons why today there's so much less spiritual practices like that are known, people have spiritual powers, is because we're in a lowly spiritual state. We're in a lesser spiritual state. We don't have great mystical leaders on the holy side, so therefore on the unholy side also there's not much power as well. They're always in balance. Yeah.
Is there opinions that such things that are just, let's say, clearly written in the Talmud or Bishop Nora about, how to, shoes Is there those that say dismiss even that?
No, I don't think there are halachic sources that would dismiss something that's written in the Talmud, but there are some who have said that a lot of these practices can be given somewhat of a rational explanation. And so some people attempt to take a lot of what we call these Jewish superstitions and say, no, they're not superstitions, they do actually have some rational base. And so therefore they don't need to be dismissed even by the rationalist who says that we shouldn't do Baba Mises. They could also accept things because there's a certain rationality to it. So, for example, even the red string idea, that wearing a red string will repel the evil eye. So this was something that was particularly done with babies, even though now it's soccer players and rock stars wear them as well, but particularly babies would wear red strings. And Rav Moshe Stern, who I mentioned earlier, he says that he saw that the custom was to either put it on the baby or on the cot of the baby, a red string. And this was to avert the evil eye. Now, he suggests that there could even be a rational explanation to it, and that is that, when people see a new baby, everyone looks at the new baby and says, look how cute, and that itself may cause an evil eye, because just the looking may sometimes cause jealousy, or someone says, why did they have such a cute baby, I want one, and that could cause a negative energy. Even bad thoughts do have an impact. The red string, just because the color red is bright and distracting, so that itself might distract a little bit from the attention on the baby, and people might just notice the red string a little bit by taking a little bit of attention away, so it reduces the power of the ayin hara, of the evil eye. So that's one attempt to give some rational explanation to a red string. It's a distracting thing. It's just something that you don't focus on just the baby, you sort of notice this other thing that distracts you. So yeah, look, there are people who have attempted to explain that also rationally. The cutting of the nails thing, there's a tradition of cutting nails in a different order, not to cut the nails next to each other, but to cut alternately. Interestingly, the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, laughed at that custom. He didn't do it. He laughed at that. He didn't do it. Yeah. But laughing at it was probably his way of sweetening the negative energy behind it. When a tzaddik laughs at something, so that can sweeten the judgment. But or also to not cut your fingernails and your toenails on the same day. So if you cut your fingernails today, you can cut your toenails tomorrow. So these customs as well, some have suggested that the reason for that is because we don't want to imitate anything that is done in the process of death. When a person passes away in preparation for burial, one of the things is that they cut their nails. The Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, prepares the body for burial. One of the things they do is they cut the nails of the body, and they'll cut the fingernails and the toenails on the same day, of course, because they're preparing for burial. So we don't do that because they do it. That's also the reason why some people will not sleep with their feet facing the door in the bedroom, because that's the way the dead bodies are laid out. Before being taken out to burial, with the feet towards the door, so we don't lie in such a way. That's also the reason why the very common idea of not walking around in socks, you have to wear your shoes. One of the reasons is because in mourning, when people are, God forbid, in the state of mourning, they remove their shoes, and so you shouldn't walk around in a state that looks like you're in mourning, because that is inviting death and mourning and that type of thing. So you shouldn't do that in such a way.
If you were wearing a shirt.
Correct. To sew a button.
Unless you were chewing on a piece of cotton.
Yes. So to sew a button on somebody while they're wearing their shirt or their jacket or something, you shouldn't do that unless they're chewing cotton. I don't know why the chewing cotton saves it.
It shows you're alive.
Oh, well, you're breathing.
It's not a shroud.
You're also breathing and blinking and complaining but anyway, there is such a thing because they sew on the garments while of the dead person before burying them. So that's another reason. Another thing is pouring. Have you ever seen that you shouldn't pour that way? You should pour that way. So I've heard it said because that's how they pour the water over the body when they're cleansing the body for burial. They pour it that way. So we should pour that way.
The idea that these things depend on how much importance you give to it. In other words, it's you that albeit validly. Like if I believe in this, and it will make me, I'll exude the energy, or I will.
There is definitely an idea when it comes to the evil eye. it says that, and generally the powers that are called the mazikin, the negative energies, it says that if you give them attention and worry about them, then they worry about you. So the more conscious and aware and worried and concerned you are about these negative energies, the more they'll concentrate on you. Whereas if you ignore them and don't worry about them at all, so then they're less likely to have any power on you. So there is such a thing. There's also an idea called Shomer Psoim Hashem, which means that Hashem, God will always guard the foolish. Meaning if you're just foolish, just naive, and don't worry about these things, so then God will look after you. When you're too sophisticated,
Not aware of. When are you foolish when you don't?
when you say it doesn't make a difference. Like you don't know any better. If you don't know any better, so then it's only people who are sophisticated and worry about these things then have to worry about.
If my father used to tell me, my brother, that if you think that you're with company and there is someone that's known to be an envious person, I think my dad used to say you have to look, he said in Yiddish, look above them and think certain thoughts.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely an idea that the greatest antidote to the negative, the evil eye, is having a positive eye. If you have a good eye and if you look positively on other people, so then the negative eye can't affect you. Only if you have a bit of a vulnerability.
Purity office says that there are some people with an evil eye and they themselves don't know. Correct?
Could be. Yeah. But your good eye will definitely be an antidote to them.
So if you know someone's a jealous person, and there are people who are
That's what I'm telling you.
what's the best? You just kind of ignore them and don't.
The best thing is for you not to have jealousy, not to have negativity, not to look even at them with a negative eye. Look positively. If you even judge them positively, that person. If you're judging negative, then you'll also be judged negatively. If you judge them positively, so then that itself is a protection. Going back to the pregnant woman, there are several practices around a pregnant woman that we try to keep them in a very holy space. There's an idea written in the Jewish sources that a pregnant woman should not be around strife, around discord, unholy things. Many people, and this is I think the most common question I get, the number one question people ask me is, can a pregnant woman go to a cemetery? That's the most common question I get. That there are people who they don't keep kosher and they don't have any questions about their kosher kitchen because they don't keep kosher, and they don't keep any of the festivals, they don't keep Shabbos, and there's no other questions they have. But this they're very strict about. Can a pregnant woman go to a cemetery? They've heard that they can't. So again, this is not written anywhere that a pregnant woman cannot go to a cemetery. It's not written anywhere, but it is a custom and tradition for a pregnant woman not to go to a cemetery. Why? So again, you could give somewhat of a logical explanation, and that is that a pregnant woman, her state of mind has a direct impact on the unborn child. So if she's in a place that is a place of distress and sadness, so then that could impact negatively her unborn child. So she shouldn't go to a cemetery, shouldn't go to a funeral, shouldn't be around that type of atmosphere because her distress will upset the unborn child. That's a very logical way of explaining it. A slightly more spiritual way of explaining it is that she is housing life and developing life, so she shouldn't be around death. Death is the opposite of where she is. She is building life within her, and so she shouldn't be in the place of death. Now, practically speaking, just because I'm asked the question always, so I might as well answer it, that she is allowed to go to a cemetery if she will be more distressed by not going to a funeral or a consecration, whatever it is, than going, so then she should go. And if she feels she wants to go, she absolutely can. There's no rule against it. However, to just visit the cemetery while pregnant, when you could do it another time, or to go when it won't really make such a difference if you go or you don't go, it's still preferable not to go according to the tradition. So again, you can give somewhat of a logical explanation to it, and but it is in the end a spiritual idea. Okay, in the area of naming babies, there's a lot of rules and ideas, and one of them, like you mentioned, is that you shouldn't name somebody after somebody who passed away young. Now, so there are a few ways around that, or a few. Some people say it's not a problem at all, as long as the name is a common name. So then, who says you're naming after that person? There are many people with that name. So if somebody, the person who passed away young, and their name was Shlomo, so Shlomo is the name of King Solomon. It's a beautiful name, and so why can't you call them Shlomo? It's not a problem. That's what some say. Others say that no, because you're naming after that person, it does make a connection, and so it's better not to. But if you add a second name, so then that's a new name. So if you call them Shlomo Zalman, Shlomo Chaim, or whatever it is, so then it's a new name. It's not exactly the name of the person who passed away young, so that's not a problem. It also depends on what circumstances they passed away young, and there are authorities who say when it comes to Holocaust victims, so then they are all holy, and so there's absolutely no problem in naming after them, even if they passed away young. But naming, there are a lot of interesting rules about that. I have actually in my family an interesting story on that one, that my father-in-law passed away quite young, and when his first grandchild was born, so they asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, should they name after him, after the grandfather who passed away. And usually the Rebbe's answer in these things was that a name, there are many people call that name, it's usually not a problem. But interestingly, the Rebbe here said not to. This was after the Rebbe was not able to speak. He had a stroke, so he was only able to nod his head or shake his head to answer questions. So they asked him, should we name it after the grandfather? He said no. So they were surprised. So they said, should we add a name as well? And the Rebbe said yes. So instead of calling him the name of my father-in-law, they called him the name plus another name. That was what the Rebbe said, which was unusual because the Rebbe, in other cases, written letters, had said that there's not a problem naming after somebody who passed away young. It later came out that my father-in-law had been named after his grandfather, who himself had passed away young. So it was already a pattern, and so anyway, that was how that name was. We're running out of time.
Too young to die.
Yeah, it's hard to say. So in conclusion, just because we have to go to the next lecture, where we're left is that the fact that something is a spiritual practice does not make it a superstition. The fact that there's no rational explanation to it also doesn't make a superstition. The question is, where does it come from? It has to come from a good source. And the best sources are from the written Torah, from the oral Torah, from the books of the mystics, and even better than that is from the grandmothers. That's a better source.